So this is how we receive the product, and it's all boxed up, and inside you'll see that there's a frame that the manufacturer puts together, so it just gives it some rigidity. And so you'll see in this case, this particular job had 4 sections, and just below that you'll see the plan, and we'll get into that plan a little bit more. But that's it's a good example of a 180, except it's on the outside. All right, so just over to the right of where the tubes are that are wrapped up, we pulled this apart, and on the top left there is the motor or the power pack, and just below that are called stanchions, and these are the legs. So this is what ties to the floor. And in the larger box on the top right is the seat, and then there's some more components and so on in there too. So bottom left, I wanted to show you just some more stanchions and some ideas of what happens when we pull it apart. You can see we pulled the packaging apart, and we've got the tubing just to the right, and they set up really nicely so it doesn't get damaged. They've got a good wrap on it, but they've also got, when you look closely at the end of each tube, there's some really dense cardboard inserts that protect the ends, and that's very important because these tubes are manufactured exactly to the drawing that we're seeing over to the right. And just zoom in on that picture on just to the right of the tubes. So here's just an example of what was in that box with the seat. So on the bottom right are the connectors, and you see there's 3 connectors, and we'll show that to you a little bit later when we're installing the lift. And the box on the just above there are the instructions and the drawing, which we had shown you earlier. And just inside there you'll see a card, a data card, and that's very interesting. We'll get into that a little bit later. But the data card is how the lift is configured and how it's been programmed. And that's very important given that there are some interesting features with this particular installation. All right, so then we got onto the job site over the client's home, just to the right of the drawing there, and you can see at the bottom looking up, there's several different risers, and this is quite interesting. Just to the right of that, I wanted to illustrate that there is a tripping hazard here. Just go to the next one on the right. So what did we do about that? Well, there's a couple of things that we could do to finish that off. We didn't want to go straight out, which is the standard finish of any stair lift. We could have done a 90-degree turn, or we could have done a 180-degree turn. But as you'll see as we get into these a little bit later, that really wasn't going to be very practical because there just wasn't quite enough room. So we've got an ingenious, or Handicare's got an ingenious finish called a drop nose, and that's what we're going to do with this particular installation. So over on the left in the center there, you can see looking up, there's 2 platforms at the landing, and there's 1 step in between. So that's a little bit of a hassle, but the reason that the architects do this is to save space, because otherwise they would have had to bring one more step out into the landing. So there's a couple more photos at the top. Wanted to give you an idea as to what the landing looks like at the very top, and a couple of different views of that. And then I wanted to get an overview of the complete staircase, which is the 2 over here. And then the far right, we're starting to do the installation. And so you can see we have the legs or the stanchions on there already, And if you were to go back to the drawing tells us exactly where they're going to be, and it tells us what the height of each one of these stanchions are going to be as well. And furthermore, we'll get into this even further, but one of the particular important things with this is to make sure that the pitch on these various segments are exactly correct. And so when you're scrolling even a little bit more, look at the top step of the bottom landing, there's a requirement there of 37.2 degrees, and we don't want to be off from that at all. So on the side, on the very bottom, you can see in the side view, you can see where that drop nose is. And later on, we'll just see how compact that is when we start doing the installation. Okay. So just wanted to show a couple more examples of the tubes being placed and installed. And there's what we get with each package. With the stanchion, we get the stanchion itself that screws up and down, and we have to measure that to exactly what they're saying in order to get the pitch right. And then in each package, there's 3 bolts that bolt directly into the floor, and you can also see a bolt that will tie the tube back into the top of the stanchion. And in case there's concrete, heaven forbid, there's also anchors, which we never use. So here we have Alan and Derek doing the installation of the first tube. And what we're doing here, the guys have protected the floor using that covering that we had on the tubes. They're installing the stanchions, and they're actually going to install, they're going to connect the bottom and the top, or the first and the second tube together, just because it's a lot easier to then secure it to the floor. It's got some rigidity given that it's a right angle. Okay, so what Derek has done is they pulled the cabling from the bottom to the top, and what we didn't see at the bottom on the left side is the cabling that comes out of there. But in this particular installation, or all installations, there is a charge location at the top and the bottom, and the homeowner here wanted to have an additional one on the first landing. We'll see that a little bit later. So what we had to do then is have the designers design another charge location at that landing. We'll see that in a bit. So there's Derek having some fun. They're now getting the third tube attached to the second one, and just where Derek is kneeling down, you can see the connection. So that connection, the black tube, is what is used to connect the 2 tubes together, and this is very precise. So the Handicare has got an ingenious way of holding that in place, because it's fairly loose when you put it in there. And you can see there's a magnet at the bottom of that tube. That is a magnet. And it just shoots through the hole that we'll use later on to tighten up and tension up those tubes. And so that's being just held in place while they get the cabling through there. Go back to that. And so what you'll see in the kit that comes with each one of those connectors is 2 little plastic, white plastic ones that we'll use as covers later on, just to make it nice and neat. And then again, what you'll see on the left is the 3 bolts that will go onto the foot of the stanchion. And you can just see at the connection point, there's a little protrusion out from the tube, and you can see a sleeve that's inside there, a small sleeve, and the silver one is there. Yeah, now that helps to align the 2 tubes, and then what I think we'll see in a little bit is also there's a bolt that goes between those 2 connection points, and then of course there's going to be significant tension on that black connection point. And just over to the right, on top of that first stanchion, you'll see Derek's got a 7mm Allen wrench, and that's where that bolt attaches, or how the stanchion attaches with the bolt through to the tube. There's Derek again having some fun, and you can see that the cabling is pulled out of that third tube, and you can just see that they've got the cabling through the connection. That's that black tube on the fourth riser up, or third riser up from the landing. And we've got a fish tape there, and that's really important to have when, well, it's easier to have when you want to pull the tubing through the electrical cable through the tubing, and particularly important when you've got some midpoint connections like we did on we'll show you in a little bit. Okay, thank you. So we kind of made a mess of that box, but this is what's going to be used upstairs. So the little one on the right are the batteries, and in this case there's two 7-amp batteries. That's a standard requirement or battery type when we're doing a one-story insulation. You can also get them in 11-amp and 18-amp battery size if you wish, and that's where you have two stories, or you have multiple floors that you're going to go through. So in the center there is the motor, and on the left side is the sheathing or the cover that's going to go over top of the motor. So we pulled the last tube up to the top, and you can see we've attached the stanchions to the stanchions to the rail, and then on the top right you'll see there's a couple of silver points there. That's the positive and negative for the charge, and you can just barely see, but sticking out of the tube is the connection point for those electrical. And each one of the cables that pulls through the tube has got a Y in it, so that we can connect to, in this case, a charger, and then also to the charging points. So the charger in this case is at the bottom of the staircase. The black end would attach to the end of the electrical tube, that electrical cabling that Derek was playing with a little bit earlier on. Okay, next one. And you'll also see, looking straight down at the tube, there's a connection point. Note the tube on the right. There's a connection point right there, and that's where that silver sleeve that we saw earlier connects to where Derek is now holding the end of that tube. That connects just to the left side of that. So there's a sleeve and there's a bolt that goes together, and that helps to completely align the tube. Okay, next slide. So, and there is Alan now just putting that together. So what Derek and Alan are doing is just putting the tube next to each other, the two tubes next to each other, and you can see that the sleeve inside the connection sleeve is inside the tube, and it's being held in place with that magnet just underneath his wrist. And there's a tool there that just at his left hand that is going to use to tighten this up to get this exactly aligned. And at the back, you can see that connection area, the protrusion, has got a bolt in it. So just at the very top, you can see a sleeve that is just a little bit of reflection at the top that holds these, that just aligns this. And then this bolt is what's going to pull it together. And then, so before they tighten this up, what they're going to do is use this tool right here, and this grips onto the tube, and then down here, this is a little connection point here. That's some teeth that will align to the rack at the bottom. Pull the seat out of the box, that we showed earlier on, and it's up on the top floor, and it's got it laying down. And over on the left-hand side, just a couple of more pictures where they're putting this together, so you can see Alan has that tool, and he's just tightening it up right now, and he just back up the picture on the far left, that is the drop nose. And you can see we have now taken the covering, thank you, that we had underneath there. And what we can't see underneath this little point right at the very base of the tube is that there's like a neoprene base underneath that piece of metal. Now, the idea is, as the manufacturer recommends, that you bolt all this stuff in. Breaks our heart to bolt right into the hardwood floor. So if we can avoid it, we don't do it. And in this case, we didn't do it. And the reason that we're able to not follow those instructions, if you will, is because there's so much tension above on all the stanchions. And we've got two 90-degree turns, and we've also got an overrun at the top. And there's no way that is going to be moving at the bottom. So it just saves us from having to put in any holes through into the hardwood floor. We're still haven't mounted the stanchions yet onto the floor, but we're getting ready to do it. So at this point in time, we're just positioning it. You can see Derek has got a square that he lines up to the edge of the tube, and he points it directly over to the wall. And in this case, it has to be 210 millimeters from the wall. And then also on the other side, we'll see that in a minute, we'll do exactly the same thing. So it calls for 210 on both sides to the wall. Now, unfortunately, when just because of the nature of their home, we can't. Wait, there's still a measurement of 210 to the wall, but there's no wall at the bottom. So what we do in that case, or what we did in this case, is completely align the side to side, and then just where Derek is sitting, there's another alignment that we had to do. I think it was 180 millimeters, if I'm not mistaken, from the tube to the baseboard. So it wasn't the wall, but it's the baseboard. And because that's where our markers were. And so you can see Alan just, back to that point, you can see Alan just doing some final work on one of those stanchions, just to get it in place and get the bolts tied up. Above where Derek is, you can see we've mounted the motor. So we've got some of the stanchions in place now. And as you can see at the very top, just above where the motor is, you can see there's some bolts in there. So we've actually bolted down the stanchion. And so now that is secure. That's not going anywhere. And we played it with this a little bit, but all along we make sure that we're using exactly the right angles. So there's a story behind using the right angles, and that is that with the data card that we mount into the lift, this tells the little computer that's in here exactly where it is. So what we do is we align, the motor needs to be lined up exactly where the connection is to the electrical on the left, just exactly, just a little bit below where Derek's arm is. And what he's putting in there is the final upper limit. So if that ever, for any reason, goes beyond the charge strip, then it'll completely stop. It's a final safety, and so there's no way that lift is going to go off the top. And there's two things that happen there actually. There's a micro switch that it will touch, that, and if for any reason the micro switch doesn't work, then physically the lift cannot go past there. It would just get jarred up on that. So there's no way that it can go over the end from a safety perspective. So what we're doing with the seat is I wanted to show you the face on, and a little difficult to see here, but that the front panel comes off, and then in behind there's two bolts in the top that really just hold that together. But in behind there is a bracket, and then we mount that directly onto the motor. We actually didn't get a picture of the step, but we would have mounted the bracket onto the motor, and then bolted that in place, and then we mount the seat onto the bracket that we just took off the back of the seat base. And what Derek is doing now is just connecting the electrical, and so that's just going to the motor. And there's a cable that goes from the upper right-hand side, in this case of the seat where the toggle is, and up where that is, there's the toggle. There's a little warning light that will flash to say, what's going on. If there's any issues, it'll flash, or if it's not on, then you know that there's no power getting into it. And there's also an emergency stop on that toggle as well, which is kind of odd, rather ironic, because if you stop the toggle, just let the toggle go, it'll stop. So really, there's not much point in having the emergency. You'd still have to take your hand off the toggle and put it on the emergency, and it would have stopped a long time ago. But it's code, and it's required for all lifting devices. So just onto the right, where Derek is putting together the cabling, above there you can see we've got a level, and at this point in time, as I recall, if you scroll all the way into there, as I recall, that seat is quite, the bubble is way off, and so you can see that from that perspective, that the seat is still tilted to the right. So let's close that up. So what we wanted to do was get it centered, but you'll see the bubble is still to the right a little bit, or it's to the right a little bit. So that means that the seat is going to be tilting a tiny little bit to the left. Now, the reason that we do that is because it makes people feel just a wee bit more secure. They don't know that it's tilted to the right because it's not that much. It's maybe a degree, or maybe 1.5 degrees. But it just feels more secure. It's an interesting phenomenon, and we discovered this a few years ago. So it's just something that we do. We align that seat a wee bit to the upside of the staircase, and I suspect that's probably what we do when we're sitting in. Probably lean a little bit to the right anyway, just farther away from downside of the staircase. So it's leveled up. Now I want to talk a little bit about, before we get into this, I want to talk a little bit about why this product is so darn unique, and that is because there are no sensors on the tube. So on every other stair lift in the marketplace, including straight stair lifts, there's going to be something that tells the motor where it is. So in this case, there's nothing on the tube to do that, nothing. And you'll see in some of the pictures that we've got, the motor itself actually changes angles. So it follows the tube. You can see that the motor is over to the right, and the seat is up in an upright position, and then on the left side, or even just on those illustrations at the top in the finished part, you can see that the motor is completely aligned with the seat. But then when you go down to when you look at the drop nose at the very bottom, look where the motor is. It's basically 90 degrees to the floor. So it's completely turned. Now, how does it do that? Well, that data card that I was talking about earlier is the information required by the motor to know exactly what to do and where. So the data, the programming will say when the seat should be realigned. So the motor just simply follows the tube. That's all it does. But what does happen is that the seat will align, and it'll always be in the seat will be in a horizontal position, and the overall positioning of it will be vertical. And how it does that is by counting teeth. So when we align this, when we bring that to the very top and get it positioned, there's a process by which we get it registered, and it knows this is point 0 or tooth 0, and we align it exactly to the center of the two charge strips that we showed you earlier, so that the charge strip or the charging touch points at the back of the motor touch exactly where the charge points are on the back end of the underside of the rail. So we'll just continue on that. So there's a charge point at the very bottom, and then there's also a charge point. The stair lift is stopped there, and the reason is that the homeowner wanted to store this out of the way. There's a couple of things that we could have done. We could have had it one step up from where the drop nose is, so that just up and out of the way a little bit. And we could have done that, but what she wanted to do was move it completely out of the way. Now, the issue that we discussed with regard to the tripping hazard is that there is a tripping hazard at the bottom, but she said that her kids and all their family members are very seldom going to be at the front door. The only reason they're going to be at the front door is to answer it, because they come in and out of the garage. So, and then the other thing that they will do is that, although we can't see this in the illustration, there's a seat, a long seat, that they have at the front door. And so what they were going to do is just move that to the edge, beyond the edge of where the staircase is, again, just to mitigate the tripping hazard. So getting back to the positioning of the stair lift at the landing, there's another, so we're, on the middle landing. There's another set of charge points there. There's a charge point there, rather. So, interestingly, when the way that the program works is that the handheld remote has a radio signal and has radio, not IR or infrared. So when we park that stair lift up there, in order for it to stop, the only way it's going to stop is when we're using the handheld remote. So when the client is on the stair lift using the toggle, the seat will completely go by that charge point, because you wouldn't want it to stop there. Why would you want it to do that? They're not getting off that point. The whole purpose of having it where it is so that it's out of the way and it charges. So there's 3 charge points in this particular configuration: at the drop nose, at the very top, landing, the overrun, and also at the landing. So this program is really, the programming is very interesting, and the data card just slips into the front of the motor, just in behind where the footrest is, and what I want to show is where we're putting in the cover. It's pretty simple, and interestingly, this was designed by the Brits, and so they don't call this an off-on switch; they call it a holiday switch. And so, sure enough, it's an off-on switch. But the idea is that if you're on holiday or vacation, because they won't say vacation, they say holiday. So if you're on holiday, then you can turn it off. So normally, what you would do is always have this lift on, always. And you always want to have it in a charge location, because if it's not in a charge location and it's still on, it's in a ready position. It's ready to go, and it will it'll just drain. And so after 3 or 4 days, the batteries, if it's not in the charged position, or if the charger is unplugged, then it will completely drain the batteries. So the holiday switch is really there if for some reason you want to turn it off, you're going to be away from the house, and you really just don't want it on. Or, maybe for some reason, if you didn't have that charge location at the landing, you could run it down to another position if you're moving furniture or whatever. You could move that to another position that takes the stair lift out of the way, and then you could turn it off and just leave it in a state where it's just off. So you can see this is a cute thing about the cover that's on the upper side. You can see a tiny little rectangle hole there. That's where the switch goes. And then the 2 cables will just run over to the batteries. And so we just disconnect 2 of the cables on the batteries and just tie that in so that we use it as basically as an interrupter, a way to open the circuit with a switch. So wanted to show how you can turn the unit. So at the top, we designed the rail so that it would come up onto the top landing, and you can see what we did. If you scroll in on that one right there, you'll see the arm is exactly aligned, or just to the inside of the corner of the wall. And so when we did our photo survey, when we submit our photos, there was a point right at the corner of the baseboard, and what I wanted to do was, so we instructed them with our photos that that arm needed to be just inset slightly from the wall, corner of the wall, so that it's we took up as much space as we could. So we got the stair lift as close as we could into the hallway area, so that now the client is able to get off that way. But to go to the broader pictures, then what you can also do is turn it 90 degrees. So in fact, you can turn it 45 degrees. So so this is in the 90 degree off position, and so had we had a standard finish where the stair lift finished right at the nose of the landing rather than having it overrun, then you can see that the client would then exit onto the top of the landing. So as it is, because they had that space on the wall, which is a perfect area for a landing, we had this overrun, and so they could use it as an overrun to get off just the way it is, or we could turn 45 degrees or 90 degrees. Now, interestingly, these seats are they're meant to swivel 180 degrees if you want to, and so we wouldn't normally do that. But of course, if the seat, if for any reason is not in the ride position, which is where the back is parallel to the wall that we see in the overrun, then it will not function. So it wouldn't be normal to have the seat facing downward, but one of the things that HandiCare does is it allows us to have a turn and go. So in another time we can talk about that, but the turn and go allows us to have a stair lift in a very narrow staircase. But it also allows us, when you go to the drop nose, you can see now we've got normally the seat would be positioned so you only get off facing away from the banister, if you will. But now we've also got this ability to turn it 45 degrees, or 90 for that matter, but 45 degrees, and this is just going to help the client to get off. And there's a nice large area there, and this will help them with their transfer. So if, in this case, the client was in a wheelchair, then it would just help the client or a caregiver to get off, to transfer.